The storm arrived like a furious beast, darkening the sky and making the very earth tremble beneath its weight. The wind howled with such power that it sounded almost like a living thing, twisting and screeching through the trees, bending their branches in ways that felt unnatural. Lightning sliced through the thick black clouds, illuminating the landscape in harsh, white bursts that left shadows dancing in the corners of the world. The rain came down in torrents, a wall of water crashing against the windows, and the sound of it pounded on the house like an unstoppable force. Inside the home, the small family huddled together in the warm, comforting glow of their living room. Lilia, the mother, sat on the couch, knitting a scarf, her face knitted with concentration but filled with a sense of peace. Brian, her husband, was at the window, his hand resting on the frame, gazing out at the chaos outside. The storm made him uneasy, as it did anyone who lived through such wild weather. And then there was Sophia, their 6-year-old daughter. Sophia was a quiet girl, but her mind was always whirling, full of thoughts and questions. She often found herself staring out of the window, wondering about the world beyond. As the storm raged on, the howling wind seemed to push against the house, rattling the windows and causing the walls to creak in protest. But it was in this moment of chaos that Sophia's eyes caught something through the thick curtain of rain outside. A shadow, dark and moving slowly across the lawn. She pressed her small hands against the glass, her breath fogging up the window. She could see the figure now. A dog, struggling through the downpour, its coat soaked, its gait unsteady. It was as if the storm itself had birthed this creature, a lost soul caught between worlds. "Mom! Dad! There's a dog outside!" Sophia exclaimed, her voice tinged with both excitement and worry. Lilia and Brian both turned, surprised by her sudden outburst. "Sweetheart, it's just the storm. You're seeing things?" Brian said softly, trying to reassure her. But Sophia's eyes remained glued to the window. She could see the dog more clearly now. It was no ordinary dog. The animal had a dark coat, its fur matted and wet, but there was something else about it, something strange and urgent. The dog's eyes shone with an intelligence that seemed almost human, and its movement was slow, as if it had been through something far worse than the storm itself. "Please, Mom, we have to help it." Sophia's voice broke through her parents' hesitation. Lilia hesitated for a moment. She had always taught Sophia to be cautious, to stay away from danger. But there was something about the pleading look in her daughter's eyes, something that reached deep into Lilia's heart. Without a word, she stood up, walking toward the door. Brian followed her, but there was a sense of dread in his steps. He didn't know what to expect, but the storm had made everything feel heavier, more dangerous. The dog collapsed on the doorstep just as they reached the front door. It was as if it had nothing left to give. Its body was battered, its breath ragged, and the rain continued to pour down, soaking everything in sight. Lilia gasped. She could see the wounds on the dog's side, scratches, bruises, and something worse. A deep, jagged mark that looked like it had been made by a knife. She knelt beside it, her fingers trembling as she touched the dog's fur, feeling its warmth beneath the cold rain. There was no doubt in her mind. This dog had been through hell. "Lilia, I don't know about this," Brian murmured, his voice filled with concern. "We don't know who or what this dog is. Could be dangerous." "I don't care," Lilia replied firmly, her voice filled with compassion. "This dog needs help." And in that moment, something changed in the air. The storm outside seemed to quiet just a little, as if the world itself held its breath. Sophia, still staring at the dog with wide, concerned eyes, stepped closer, her small hands reaching out toward the animal. I think it's hurt really badly, Mom," Sophia said, her voice small but full of concern. "I know, sweetie," Lilia replied, her voice gentle but filled with resolve. "But we'll help her. We'll take care of her." Brian reluctantly opened the door wider, allowing the two of them to bring the dog inside. They gently lifted her, feeling her frail, trembling body. The dog didn't fight them. It seemed to understand that this was a safe place, a refuge from the storm that had battered it so mercilessly. As they settled the dog in the living room, the storm raged on outside, its fury undeterred by the quiet moment inside the house. But something had shifted, something had changed. The bond between Sophia and this mysterious dog was already beginning to form. Sophia didn't fully understand why, but she felt an unspoken connection to the animal, as if the dog knew something she didn't, something important, something hidden deep within her. Storm. The dog's name somehow felt right. Storm had come to them, injured and exhausted, but her journey was far from over. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a story that would change all of their lives forever. The storm outside showed no signs of relenting. The wind howled and shrieked against the windows, as if it too felt the unease that had settled within the house. Inside, the warmth of the fire and the flickering lights offered a fragile sense of comfort. But the dog, now lying on a pile of blankets in the corner, was a silent reminder of the dark world beyond. Sophia couldn't take her eyes off her. The dog's coat was dark, like a shadow that had woven itself into the very fabric of the night. Her fur, still soaked from the rain, clung to her emaciated body, and her breathing was shallow, as though each inhale was a struggle. Sophia felt an overwhelming urge to reach out and comfort her, but the dog's eyes, intelligent and deep, made her pause. It was as if the dog could see right into her, as if she understood Sophia in a way no one else could. "Sophia, honey, why don't you go get some rest?" Lilia suggested gently, walking over to her daughter, who was standing motionless in front of the dog. Sophia glanced up at her mother. "But Mom, the dog, she's not okay. She's hurting, and I think she's scared." Lilia knelt down beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know, sweetie, but we'll help her, okay? You can help her tomorrow. It's late, and we all need some rest." Sophia hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the dog. It felt wrong to leave her, but something told her that the dog wasn't just any ordinary animal. There was something deeper, something unspoken between them, a connection that tugged at Sophia's heart like an invisible thread. The dog's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Sophia felt as though she could hear her thoughts, feel her pain. She had never experienced anything like it before. "I'll stay with her," Sophia said quietly, surprising both her mother and father. Her voice was steady, and there was a new determination in her eyes. "I can help her, Mom. I know I can." Lilia exchanged a worried glance with Brian, but neither of them had the heart to argue. They both knew their daughter's heart. Sophia wasn't one to back down when it came to helping others, even if that meant taking on something she didn't fully understand. Brian, however, couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. There was something about this whole situation that didn't sit right with him. The storm, the dog's injuries, the way Sophia seemed to be connected to her in a way that felt unnatural. But he said nothing. His love for Sophia and Lilia outweighed his fears, and they were all in this together. As Sophia sat on the floor beside the dog, her fingers gently brushing against the wet fur, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this animal than met the eye. She had seen many dogs in her life, but Storm was different. The dog's coat, though tattered and scarred, seemed to hold a certain dignity, an ancient sort of wisdom that Sophia couldn't quite place. It was as if the dog had been through battles, both physical and emotional, that had left indelible marks on her soul. And then it happened. Sophia closed her eyes, allowing her fingers to continue stroking the dog's fur. The rhythmic motion helped calm her nerves, but it was more than that. It was a way to connect with the dog, to give her a sense of safety amidst the storm. Suddenly, her mind filled with images, flickers of memories that didn't belong to her. Cold, gray room. A man sitting in a chair, his eyes distant, lost in thought. The dog, standing at his side, watching over him with unwavering loyalty. Sophia saw the man's weathered hands, clasping something small and delicate, a bundle of papers wrapped in a cloth. The dog, Storm, was there, guarding the man, watching over him as if she knew the significance of that small, hidden object. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, and Sophia opened her eyes, her heart racing. She looked down at the dog, who now seemed more alive, more present than ever before. "Did you see that too?" Sophia whispered, though she knew the dog could not answer. The room was silent, save for the howling of the wind outside and the occasional rumble of thunder. But Sophia could feel it, a silent understanding between her and Storm. The dog wasn't just a stray caught in the storm. She was a protector, a guardian of something important, something that had been hidden away. "Sophia," Lilia called from the kitchen, breaking her trance. "Are you coming to bed?" But Sophia couldn't move. She was glued to the floor, to the dog, to the strange, inexplicable connection she had just experienced. There was something more here, something important, and she knew it was up to her to uncover it. "I'm coming, Mom," Sophia said, her voice soft but filled with a quiet resolve. "But I'm not leaving her. She's special." Lilia, though confused, didn't press her further. She knew her daughter better than anyone, and there was something in Sophia's voice that told her this wasn't just about a stray dog. It was about something bigger. Sophia stayed with Storm for the rest of the night, her hand gently resting on the dog's back as she fell asleep, dreaming of cold rooms, old men, and the quiet guardianship of an animal who had seen too much. The next morning, the storm had finally begun to ease. The once howling wind had turned into a soft breeze, the violent rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, and the clouds in the sky began to break apart, allowing the early light of dawn to spill through the windows. The sun was shy, peeking out from behind the thick clouds, painting the world in a muted, golden light. Sophia sat on the floor next to Storm, her eyes wide as she observed the dog closely. The previous night had been filled with the haunting images that had come to her in her dreams, and the more she thought about them, the more she felt a strong pull to understand the dog's past. There was something important in that moment of connection, a message that had been passed from the dog's silent, weathered eyes to her own. Lilia entered the living room first, the sound of her footsteps soft on the wooden floors. She had been up early, making tea and preparing breakfast for the family. But when she saw Sophia still sitting by the dog, she couldn't help but smile warmly. "Good morning, sweetheart." Lilia greeted her gently, though there was a hint of concern in her voice. "How's our guest doing?" Sophia looked up at her mother, her eyes filled with wonder and determination. "She's better, Mom. I think she's been through a lot. She needs to rest, but she's not like any other dog I've met." Lilia crouched beside her daughter, reaching out to stroke the dog's fur. Storm's eyes fluttered open at the gentle touch, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her head slightly, her gaze locking onto Lilia. The intelligence in those eyes made Lilia feel both awed and uneasy, as though the dog could see straight through her, straight into her soul. "She's been through a lot," Lilia murmured, her hand lingering on the dog's back. "But she's strong. I can see it in her eyes." Sophia nodded quietly, but her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts kept drifting back to those strange dreams, the visions that had appeared so vividly in her mind the night before. She didn't understand them, but she knew one thing for certain. They were important. Later that afternoon, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, her legs dangling from the chair as she swung them back and forth. Her thoughts were heavy, each one filled with pieces of a puzzle that she couldn't yet fit together. She didn't want to tell her parents about the dreams. Not yet. They might think she was imagining things, or worse, that she was making it all up. But something inside her felt the truth of those visions. She knew, deep down, that Storm had been guarding something precious, something worth protecting. As the day passed and the house grew quiet, Sophia's curiosity led her outside. She knew it was too early to ask her parents for help, so she would go alone. The dog was resting inside, and although Sophia felt an ache in her heart to stay by her side, she knew she had to follow this trail to understand what had happened. The neighborhood was peaceful after the storm, with puddles reflecting the now calming sky. Sophia wandered slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar streets with a new awareness, looking for something she had never noticed before. That's when she saw it. An old house on the far end of the block. It was weathered and worn, its paint peeling away with time. The yard was overgrown with weeds, and the windows were boarded up, giving it a ghostly, abandoned feel. Sophia paused for a moment, feeling a sudden tug in her chest. She couldn't explain why, but something about the house called to her, urging her to approach. Her hand reached out instinctively, as though she knew where she was meant to go. As she got closer to the house, a wave of unease washed over her. There was something unsettling about it, something that whispered of secrets buried deep within its walls. Sophia hesitated at the gate, her fingers grazing the rusted iron as she felt a strange sense of familiarity. She'd never been to this house before, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that it was part of the puzzle she had yet to solve. A shadow moved inside the house, and Sophia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She squinted through the dusty windows, trying to see if anyone was there. She thought she saw the flash of a figure, but before she could move closer, the front door creaked open. An older man stepped onto the porch, his weathered face obscured by the shadows. His eyes seemed to scan the street, his gaze lingering for a moment on Sophia, though he quickly turned away. The way he moved, the stiffness in his posture, it was clear that he was not just any stranger. He was someone with a purpose, someone with a presence that made Sophia feel uneasy. Sophia backed away slowly, retreating toward the edge of the yard. Her heart was racing, and she suddenly felt an overwhelming need to get back to the safety of her home. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves, and the faintest sound of a voice whispered on the breeze. "Find it. She knows where it is." The words sent a chill down her spine, but Sophia didn't look back. She ran home, her legs moving faster as she crossed the threshold of their house and slammed the door behind her. Inside, Lilia and Brian were in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Sophia's hands were trembling as she closed the door, but she didn't know how to tell her parents what she had just experienced. Felt too strange, too out of place. But as she glanced over at Storm, now lying on the living room rug, she knew the dog had led her here. There was something connected between the two of them, a bond forged in mystery, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter what it took. Later that night, as Sophia lay in bed, her mind raced with questions. Why had that man been watching her? What was hidden in that house, and why had Storm been guarding it? As she closed her eyes, she once again felt the pull of those dreams. The man, the papers, the dog's unwavering loyalty. She knew that Storm had something important to share, and somehow Sophia was the key. The days following the storm passed in a surreal blur. Sophia, despite her young age, could not shake the overwhelming feeling that something profound was unfolding around her. Every time she looked at Storm, lying peacefully on the rug or sitting silently by her side, her heart swelled with a sense of both love and purpose. The bond between them deepened each day, as if Storm's quiet presence was somehow guiding Sophia, showing her things that others couldn't see. Storm's injuries began to heal, but her exhaustion remained. She still rested often, though she became more alert with each passing hour. It was clear that the dog was recovering, though some part of her spirit perhaps, still seemed distant, as if there were pieces of her past that couldn't be fully brought to the surface. Sophia could sense this, and though the mystery gnawed at her, she did not press the dog. Instead, she spoke to her, shared her thoughts and feelings, even when Storm remained silent. It was as though Sophia had become her protector just as much as Storm had once protected others. One evening after dinner, as Sophia was drawing quietly at the kitchen table, her mother came in, holding a small, weathered envelope in her hand. It was old, yellowed with age, its edges frayed. "Sophia," Lilia called gently, her voice shaking slightly. "I found something while I was cleaning out the attic today. I think it's for you." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She pushed her drawing aside and stood, her curiosity piqued. Lilia handed her the envelope, and Sophia took it carefully, feeling its weight in her hands. The envelope was sealed with a deep, dark red wax, an intricate insignia pressed into it, though the symbol was unfamiliar to her. "What's this?" Sophia asked, looking up at her mother, her fingers tracing the wax seal. "I'm not sure," Lilia answered softly, her voice distant. "I found it in an old chest up in the attic." It was wrapped up in a pile of old things? But it looks important, doesn't it? Sophia nodded, her pulse quickening. She felt a strange sense of déjà vu, like she had seen this before. It was as if the letter was meant for her, like it was part of the puzzle she had been slowly piecing together in her mind. With trembling hands, Sophia broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was old and faded, but the words were still legible. To whom it may concern, I, Jacob Reeder, leave my legacy in the hands of the one who understands. To the loyal guardian who has protected this house through all trials, may she find what is hidden. You know what to do. Protect it or all will be lost. Jacob Reeder. Sophia's mind raced. Jacob Reeder. That name. Somewhere, deep in her memories, it sounded familiar. And then the pieces fell into place. The old house. The man she had seen standing outside it. The one who had been watching her. He must be related to Jacob Reeder. Could he be his nephew? The handwriting was clear, and the message was even clearer. Storm had been guarding something. Something important. Without a word, Sophia looked over at Storm, who was lying beside her, her deep, intelligent eyes fixed on the letter in Sophia's hands. For a long moment, the two simply stared at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Mom! Dad? Sophia whispered, her voice barely audible. Storm's been guarding something. I think it's hidden at that old house. Lilia and Brian exchanged a confused glance. Sweetheart, Lilia said, her voice laced with concern. What do you mean? Sophia swallowed, the weight of her words pressing down on her chest. The letter says Storm is protecting something. Something important. And I think it's in that house. I saw a man there, he was watching me. He has to be connected to this somehow. I know it. Brian walked over, a furrow in his brow. That house. The one at the end of the street? That place is abandoned. There's no way anything valuable is there. But Sophia's instincts were screaming that there was more to it. I know it's there, Dad. I can feel it. We have to go there. Storm knows too. Lilia looked at Brian, her face torn between disbelief and a sense of unease. She didn't want to put Sophia in danger, but there was something about the way her daughter spoke, something in her voice that carried the weight of truth. Finally, Brian nodded, albeit reluctantly. We'll go, he said, but we'll be careful. This doesn't feel right. And so, that afternoon, after much discussion, the family, Sophia, Lilia, Brian, and Storm, set out together. They walked slowly, cautiously, as if each step was fraught with danger. The wind was picking up again, though the storm had passed. The air was thick with tension, and Sophia felt an uneasy anticipation build within her. When they reached the old house, Sophia's heart began to race. The air felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't explain. The house loomed in front of them, dark and forbidding, its windows still boarded up, its door hanging slightly ajar as though it had been waiting for them. Storm, who had been walking silently by Sophia's side, suddenly stopped. The dog's ears perked up, and her body tensed. It was clear that Storm sensed something wrong. The hair on the back of Sophia's neck stood up, but she didn't turn back. She had come this far. They had to know the truth. As they approached the house, the door creaked open, and from the shadows, the figure of a man emerged. It was him, the man she had seen days before. His eyes gleamed coldly, and as he saw them, a cruel smile spread across his face. You've come for her? The man said softly, his voice like gravel. But you're too late. Before Sophia could react, Storm lunged forward, her body a blur of motion. The dog stood between them and the man, her growls low and threatening. This ends now, the man muttered, his hand reaching into his coat. But Storm, battered and exhausted though she was, wasn't backing down. She had been guarding something precious for too long, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it. The tension in the air was palpable. Sophia's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen, watching Storm protect them, her stance firm and unyielding. The man before them was tall, with a cold expression that made Sophia's stomach twist in fear. His eyes flicked briefly to Storm before narrowing, calculating his next move. "You shouldn't have come," the man said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. His hand moved subtly toward his coat, where Sophia could only assume he was reaching for something dangerous. But Storm, her body taut with the kind of energy only a loyal protector could possess, didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on him, and her growl deepened, a warning to anyone foolish enough to approach. "Sophia, stay behind me," Brian said, pulling her back slightly, his voice shaking but resolute. His protective instincts kicked in, though he knew there was little he could do against a man like this. Lilia stood beside him, her face pale but determined. But it was Storm who moved first. With a low, powerful growl, she stepped forward, positioning herself between the family and the intruder. Despite her injuries and exhaustion, the dog's presence was commanding. It was as if she had drawn upon all her strength, summoning the fierce loyalty that had kept her alive through so many hardships. "You're not getting through," Storm's eyes seemed to say, unspoken words that carried more weight than any threat. The man took a step forward, his hand still hidden in his coat, but Storm didn't move. Instead, she let out a sharp bark, making the man hesitate for just a moment. It was the kind of bark that could freeze even the most fearless of hearts. "You really think she's going to stop me?" the man sneered, his confidence apparent, though his hand faltered slightly in its movement. "She's just a dog." The man took another step forward, but Storm was quicker. In an instant, the German Shepherd lunged, her teeth bared in warning. She was a blur of motion, a force of nature driven by an overwhelming need to protect. The man backed away, his face filled with a mix of anger and disbelief. He fumbled for whatever he had been reaching for, but Storm was already on him, circling with calculated precision. Her growls were menacing, and Sophia could see how much the dog was struggling, how every step, every movement, took everything she had. But still, Storm held her ground. "You don't know what you're dealing with," the man spat, his voice growing more desperate. His hand emerged from his coat, and for a split second, Sophia's blood ran cold. He was holding something, a small knife, its blade gleaming in the dim light. Lilia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. "Brian!" she cried, fear choking her voice. But before anyone could react, Storm darted forward once more, quicker than before. With a fierce snarl, she knocked the knife from the man's hand, sending it skittering across the dirt. In that split second, it was clear who was in control. The man stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. The dog wasn't just protecting Sophia and her family. She was protecting something far greater. She wasn't going to let anyone take it. The man gritted his teeth, realizing he was outmatched. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice filled with fury. Without another word, he turned and ran, disappearing into the shadows of the old house. Sophia took a shaky breath, her legs weak beneath her as she realized how close they had come to losing everything. But Storm, despite her injuries, was still standing tall, her body tense and her eyes never leaving the retreating figure of the man. For a moment there was silence. The storm had passed, and now it was as if the world itself held its breath, waiting. Sophia slowly moved toward Storm, her hands trembling. "You did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and gratitude. "You saved us." Storm's eyes softened as she turned to face the young girl. Sophia reached out, her fingers brushing gently against the dog's fur. In that moment, Storm lowered her head and allowed Sophia to pet her. The connection between them was unspoken but undeniable. There was no need for words. They had been through something together, something profound, and now they shared a bond that couldn't be broken. Lilia and Brian joined Sophia, their faces a mixture of relief and wonder. Brian placed a hand on Storm's back, his voice low but filled with respect. "You saved our family," he said quietly. Sophia smiled up at him. "She's not just a dog," she said, her voice filled with a newfound sense of understanding. She's our protector. She's been protecting something important." Lilia nodded slowly, looking at Storm with a mixture of awe and sadness. "You're right, Sophia," she whispered, her voice trembling. "She's been guarding something. But now, we need to find out what." Storm let out a soft, almost imperceptible whine, as if to acknowledge their unspoken question. Sophia, feeling a sense of calm wash over her, nodded. "We'll figure it out, won't we, girl?" she murmured. And so, with the evening drawing near and the house standing silent before them, the family turned back to the house. Their journey was far from over. There was more to the story, more to the mystery of Storm's past and the thing she had been guarding so fiercely. But as they walked back to their home, they did so with a sense of unity, a feeling that they had faced something dark and come out stronger for it. Days passed, and Storm's health began to deteriorate. Despite her brave stand, the wounds from her long journey, the cuts, bruises, and scars, began to catch up with her. She grew weaker, slower, and Sophia's heart ached to see it. She knew her protector wouldn't last much longer, but even in her frailty, Storm remained by her side. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Storm lay at Sophia's feet, her body quiet and still. The girl sat beside her, stroking her fur gently, feeling the deep, comforting warmth of the dog's presence. "Thank you, Storm," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've given me so much strength. I'll never forget you." Storm's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment, it was as though she was looking into Sophia's soul. A soft whine escaped her, and she nuzzled the girl's hand one last time before closing her eyes for the final time. Sophia's tears fell freely as she held her friend, her protector, one last time. But deep within her heart, she knew that Storm's spirit would live on in her bravery, her love, and the strength she had given to this young girl. In the weeks that followed, the family mourned Storm's passing. But the legacy she left behind was not one of sorrow. It was a legacy of strength, loyalty, and protection. Sophia, now braver and more resilient, carried those lessons with her every day. And then, a few months later, as the first signs of spring bloomed across the landscape, a new German Shepherd puppy arrived at their doorstep, as if by fate. She was young, full of life, and as Sophia knelt to greet her, she could almost see Storm's spirit reflected in her eyes. A quiet strength, an unspoken promise. It was as if Storm had passed the torch to the next protector. And Sophia, knowing she had been forever changed by her time with Storm, welcomed the new pup with open arms. Storm's legacy lived on. Thank you for listening Storm's story. If you felt a connection to her, like, share, and comment on how this story has touched you. Life is full of unexpected heroes, and sometimes, the fiercest protectors come in the form of the most silent souls.